Okay, so what we have here are two complex numbers. And what I want to look at in this lesson is adding and subtracting these complex numbers. So the same way when we add and subtract just normal numbers or integers, we need also to be able to subtract these things that we call complex numbers. Now remember, a complex number, it has the real part, which is this number here, and then it has the imaginary part. In this case it's 2. So again, this one has the real part and the imaginary part. So what we can do is, basically what you can do is you can add the real parts together and you can add the imaginary parts together. But you can't add the real and the imaginary parts to each other. Okay, so it's kind of like that idea in algebra where you can only add up or collect like terms. So the first thing we can do here is we can just remove the brackets. So we can just write it like this. So it's going to be 3 plus 2i plus 4 minus 3i. Okay, so that's the first thing we do. Then what we can do is we can just add up. So for example, we can just add the real parts. Okay, so just to underline, so these guys in red are the real parts, so these numbers here, and then just in green, so these guys are the imaginary parts. So we can do these, we can work with them. So if we take, for example, 3 plus 4, that's just going to be equal to 7. So we've just added these two up. And then 2i minus 3i. So if we're on 2i and we subtract 3i, so we just subtract the number or the coefficient part from each other and we retain the I. So if we're on plus 2i and we minus 3i, we're going to end up on minus I. So minus I. Or you can even say like minus 1i, for example. So there's a 1 in front of that. You don't necessarily need to put it in, you can just leave it as minus I, but that's what it means. So when you're adding complex numbers, again, you can just add the real parts and you can add or subtract the imaginary parts then as well. Okay, so if we take something like this, so again what we're doing is subtracting these from each other. Now you need to be very careful with, see the way we have this sign here, and this sign is just outside the bracket. What's actually going to happen with that sign, it's going to change the signs on the inside of the bracket. Okay, and we'll look at what that's like. So the first thing we can do is remove the bracket, okay? So this, we can just remove this bracket here, and this just becomes minus 6 plus 3i. Okay, now with this one we need to be more careful. When you have a minus outside a bracket like that, it's implied that there's a 1 here, like so. So then what you're doing is so this becomes minus 1, and you have to multiply minus 1 by each of the terms on the inside of the bracket, like so. Okay, so it's minus 1 times 5. So minus 1 times 5 is going to leave us with minus 5. Okay, and then minus 1 times minus 1 multiplied by minus 2i, that will become positive. So it'll become plus 2i, like so. So what's happening then is we can simply, like we just identify, so for example, the real numbers. So again, this here is a real number and this here is a real number. So we can subtract these from each other. So if we're on minus 6 and we minus 5, we end up on minus 11. Okay, and then if we're on plus 3i and we add 2i, we're going to end up on plus 5i, like so. Okay, so this becomes this when we subtract them from each other. Okay, so the next thing then I want to look at is when we take a complex number and we want to multiply that complex number by a real number. So in this case what we have is, so inside the bracket we have the complex number, so remember it has the real part and then the imaginary part, and what we want to do with this one is we want to multiply it by 3. If we look at this one over here, so again we have This is the complex number. You have the real part and the imaginary part, and we want to multiply this complex number by this real number, which is 3. So to do this, all we have to do is we're just going to multiply this by this and this by this. So we're just going to multiply each of these. So all you're doing is you're just taking this number on the outside and you're multiplying it by each term on the inside. So if we think about, let's work through this then, how does that work out? So 3 multiplied by 2 gives us 6. And 3 multiplied by minus 4 gives us minus 12i. Okay, so that's that first one. So this first one becomes 6 minus 12i. If we have a look at this one here, so again, we're just doing the same thing. So we want to multiply each term on the inside by the number that's on the outside, by the real number that's on the outside. So again, all you do is you just take this number and you multiply it by the real part, and then you multiply it by the imaginary part of the complex number. So how does that work out? So minus 3 multiplied by minus 4, that gives us, so like signs give plus, so minus 3 by minus 4, that gives us that would be plus 12, so that just is 12, okay? And then minus 3 multiplied by plus 3i. So again, unlike signs, so this is negative and this is positive. This will give us a negative, so negative 3i. So it looks something like that. Sorry, this will be, so this will become 12, and then this by this will give us negative 9i. Negative 9i, like so. Okay, so 9. So that's how so if you want to take a complex number and you want to multiply by a real number, you just multiply the real part by the number and the imaginary part by the number, and you kind of retain the I there as well. Okay, so that is just looking at adding and subtracting complex numbers. So again, when we're adding them, we just add the real parts and add the imaginary parts, like we've done here. With this one, when we're subtracting them, you just need to be careful if you have something like this where there's a bracket, because if you have a minus in front of a bracket like this, this minus will change the signs inside the bracket because you have to multiply each term by -1, and then you just collect up the real parts and the imaginary parts like so. And then when you want to multiply, when you're multiplying by a real number, so again you can just multiply the real number by the real part and the real number by the imaginary part, and you get your answers just like we've done in these two here. Okay, so that's adding and subtracting complex numbers, and then multiplying a complex number by a real number.